The morning mist rolled over Clearwater Valley, thick and silent, when the first sirens shattered the calm. I had barely sipped my coffee when a knock at my cabin door announced the beginning of chaos. Linda Whitmore, HOA president and real estate developer, stood there, sharp heels clicking on my wooden porch, perfume overpowering the fresh pine scent. Her smirk said she was used to getting what she wanted, but she had no idea whose land she was challenging. My family's legacy stretched back decades. My cabin wasn't just wood and nails, it was my inheritance, my independence, and my fight had just begun. Clearwater Valley had been in my family for over 50 years, a stretch of mountains, forests, and streams that seemed untouched by time. My grandfather bought the land in 1963, a sprawling 2,400 acres, for a price that now seems absurdly late, $100. But it wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the foresight. Timber rights, mineral rights, water rights, the entire enchilada. He had seen what the future might bring, and he made sure our family would always have a place to call home, a refuge from the world. I grew up here, spending every summer wandering trails, learning the smell of pine, the sound of a creek over stones, the way the wind moved through the trees. Grandpa taught me carpentry, patience, and the value of hard work. My hands learned the feel of tools, the resistance of wood, the precision of joining logs together to make something lasting. Those summers weren't just play, they were lessons in independence and survival. I learned that a cabin wasn't just a structure, it was a home, a statement, a legacy. Asterisk, when my parents died in a car accident, I inherited the land. At 28, I was suddenly not just a son, but a steward of everything my family had built. The valley, the forests, the cabin we'd spent years constructing, it all became mine. My grandfather had built an A-frame cabin, simple but sturdy. It's 1,200 square feet of space that included solar panels, a well, and a composting toilet. Completely off-grid, completely legal, and completely mine. I had fled the corporate world. Exhausted by software consulting jobs that drained my creativity and my soul, here I could breathe clean air, work remotely, and feel the freedom of independence that most people only dream about. No traffic, no office politics, just the mountains and me. I was a part of the land, and the land was a part of me. Asterisk for years. It was peaceful. I chopped firewood for winter, maintained trails, and repaired the cabin whenever a storm knocked a branch through the roof. I knew every inch of the property, the creak of the creek, the tallest pine, the hidden spring where I would refill my water bottles. I could track wildlife from deer to hawks and foxes, learning their habits, their paths, their rhythms. The valley had a heartbeat, and I had learned to listen. Even in solitude, I never felt alone. The legacy of my grandfather and parents surrounded me, a silent reminder of what had been built and why it mattered. I wasn't just living here. I was continuing a story decades in the making. Asterisk, then came the subtle signs that peace was slipping away. New developments appeared on the maps. Clearwater Estates. 32 luxury homes with prices ranging from $800,000 to $2 million, run by Whitmore Properties. The valley that had felt like it belonged only to us now had intruders, outsiders drawn by wealth rather than connection.
Wow.
And with them came Linda Whitmore, the president of the HOA, and the driving force behind the expansion. Picture her, 52 years old, bleach blonde hair and a helmet shape, driving a pristine white Escalade, her perfume overpowering and sharp. She was calculated, polished, and she wanted my land. The cabin my grandfather and I had built to fuel her development plans. I didn't know it yet, but her appearance in my life would mark the start of a relentless battle. Asterisk, it began with a letter, crisp and official, claiming that my cabin violated community standards. I stared at it, incredulous. Built this place decades before any HOA existed. The letter's paper was smooth, almost silk-like, and it felt alien in my rough hands, calloused from work. When Linda first arrived in person, her heels clacked against the porch. Her finger pointed accusingly at the walls, and I realized she wasn't here to discuss or negotiate. She was here to intimidate. She smelled like expensive perfume mixed with cigarettes, her presence aggressive yet composed. The complaints came fast. Noise violations when I was asleep, claims about the septic system, allegations that the cabin was unsafe. Each move she made was deliberate. She wasn't challenging my cabin because of code. She was challenging my right to exist here peacefully. Asterisk, I stood on that porch, listening to the wind through the pines, and understood that this was more than a dispute over property lines. This was an assault on legacy, independence, and the continuity of my family's story. The valley had been a sanctuary for decades, and now greed had shown up at the door. I realized that knowledge, preparation, and evidence were my only tools. Grandpa had left us not just land, but the right to protect it. Every deed, every permit, every note of history became a weapon in this quiet war. I knew that defending this valley wouldn't just be about laws. It would be about persistence, observation, and courage. Asterisk that summer. I doubled down on maintenance, preparing for what I sensed would be an escalation. Each board of letters, each inspection visit, each shadow of threat strengthened my resolve. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof of a life built with intention, of independence earned through sweat and skill. I knew that if I faltered, the valley, the land, and the history my family preserved could be swallowed by developers who only saw profit. But I also knew that I wasn't alone. It's the valley, the forest, the creek, the mountains. They were witnesses. Allies in a battle that was only beginning. Asterisk, I spent hours walking the trails. Looking at trees I had climbed as a child, thinking of the generations that came before me, imagining the years ahead. I realized that this fight wasn't just for me. It was for every neighbor who valued history, for every landowner who had worked tirelessly to protect their inheritance. For the idea that land could belong to more than money, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, heavier than any tool I'd ever lifted. And I knew even then that once Linda Whitmore stepped into my valley, the days of quiet mornings, misty creeks, and wind through the pines were over. The battle for Clearwater Valley had begun, and I had no choice but to fight. It started quietly, almost innocuously, with a letter slipped under my cabin door. The envelope was crisp, official, and unnervingly formal, claiming that my cabin violated community standards. I read it twice, thinking it must be a mistake. My grandfather had built this cabin decades before any HOA existed, yet there it was. A demand for fines, a warning that corrective action was required, and a thinly veiled threat that legal action would follow if I ignored it. I felt a wave of disbelief. Who would even think my home, carved by hand and standing strong for years, could be illegal? Then I realized the truth. This wasn't about legality. It was about control. Asterisk, a few days later, she arrived. Linda Whitmore drove her white Escalade up the gravel road, tires kicking up dust that clung to the morning mist. She stepped out, heels clicking against the porch like gunshots in a silent forest. Perfume, sharp and cloying, mixed with the fresh pine scent, making it hard to breathe. She looked me over with disdain, her manicured nails pointing accusingly. At the cabin I had built, every plank laid by my hands. Her voice was calm but authoritative. This structure is completely inappropriate for our community standards, she said, as if reading from a script she had perfected over years of dealing with resistant landowners. I met her gaze evenly. This cabin was built in 1995, I said, keeping my tone measured. Your HOA didn't exist until 2018. It predates all of this. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. Asterisk, that was the beginning. Complaints came almost daily. Noise violations were reported when the cabin was silent. My septic system came under scrutiny, despite having passed inspections multiple times before. Linda escalated to the county, then state authorities, filing every possible claim she could think of. She targeted anything that might seem even remotely out of compliance, hoping to overwhelm me. But I was ready. I started documenting every interaction, every visit, every phone call. I logged timestamps, recorded conversations, and saved every email and letter. Each attempt at intimidation became an archive of her harassment. Asterisk, the first county inspector arrived one Tuesday morning. Jake Morrison, a seasoned inspector with calloused hands and a workman's gait, showed up apologetically. Got a complaint, he said, glancing at the cabin and then back at me. I have to check it out. You know how it goes, when invited. Him walked him through every corner, showing permits from 1995, stamped and approved by his predecessor. He examined the septic system, the electrical wiring, the structural supports. His eyebrows rose repeatedly as he looked around. This place is built better than most houses in town, he admitted, scribbling notes on his clipboard. Who did the work? I told him about my grandfather and me, how we had spent summers constructing this cabin, learning and perfecting each detail. Jake shook his head, impressed. Anyone complaining about this is either blind or lying, he muttered. Asterisk, Linda, of course, was relentless. She began filing complaints with the State Department of Environmental Resources, claiming illegal sewage disposal. I called Marcus, my college friend who had switched from environmental science to law. Bring in a professional septic inspector, he advised. The next morning, Bob, a veteran inspector, arrived. His evaluation was meticulous. Water samples, soil analysis, structural reviews. By 10 a.m., the results were clear. My system was cleaner and safer than most municipal plants. Bob whistled in appreciation. I've seen million-dollar homes with systems half as good as yours, he said. The irony was delicious. While Linda tried to bury me under bureaucracy, her own development upstream was dumping gray water into the creek, something I discovered while researching county records. Asterisk, her persistence escalated further. She filed complaints with the fire marshal, claiming the wood stove was a hazard. When Fire Marshal Betty Chen arrived with her team, she inspected everything thoroughly. The copper pipes gleamed, clearances exceeded code, and airflow was optimal. This is textbook installation, Betty commented. Better than many professional setups I've seen. Every attempt Linda made to intimidate me backfired. Each complaint, each false claim became evidence against her, revealing a pattern of harassment and overreach. Asterisk, meanwhile, I reached out to the community. Old Pete, a retired logger, confirmed Linda had pressured him to sell his property for half its value. Maria, the diner owner, shared how she spread rumors of health code violations to intimidate long-standing business owners. Even new residents discovered overcharges and hidden fees in her development deals. Slowly, allies began to gather around me. The valley, once my private sanctuary, became a network of support. Proof that this fight wasn't just personal, it was about preserving a community from greed. Asterisk, daily life turned into a tense rhythm. Sheriff's deputies would show up for bogus calls, noise complaints filed by the same number repeatedly. I documented each encounter, photographing timestamps, recording the crunch of gravel under their tires, capturing every detail. Linda's Escalade became a symbol of threat, parked outside county offices, signaling the next wave of harassment. Each action she took, each attempt to bend the system in her favor, only made her pattern more obvious. I began to compile evidence, filing everything carefully, understanding that the legal battle would not just be about defending my cabin. It would be about exposing her relentless abuse. Asterisk, by the end of the first month, it was clear that this was no ordinary HOA dispute. Linda Whitmore was methodical, aggressive, and morally flexible. Every false claim, every attempt to manipulate authorities, every visit to county offices became part of a growing dossier of her harassment. My grandfather's legacy, the land. The cabin, the forest was at stake, but I was no longer just defending property. I was defending history, community, and the principle that independence and hard work should not be crushed by greed. The fight had escalated, and I realized that to win, I needed not only evidence, but patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Asterisk, by summer's end, I had a clear picture. Linda Whitmore wasn't just a problem. She was a pattern. Her escalation tactics, the speed of her complaints, and the audacity of her claims revealed a predictable, repeatable strategy used against anyone in her way. I knew the next steps would be bigger courtrooms, injunctions, and legal maneuvers. designed to intimidate and exhaust. But for now, I had survived the first strike. I had documented, defended, and stood firm. The valley remained mine, but I understood that this was just the opening round. The fight for Clearwater Valley had intensified, and I had no intention of backing down. By the time I realized the full scope of Linda Whitmore's harassment, the valley had begun to feel like a battlefield. Each morning brought new letters, new complaints, new attempts to intimidate me into surrendering my land. But I wasn't. Facing this fight alone, the valley had eyes and ears that had witnessed decades of history. People who had lived here all their lives, whose families had worked these mountains for generations, began to speak up. Old Pete, a retired logger, was the first to break the silence. I met him one morning at Maria's diner, the smell of strong coffee and fresh pastries filling the small room. "They want us gone," he said, his voice low but firm, running a thumb along the worn handle of his coffee mug. "She came here from California thinking she could push everyone out. Not while we're still standing." Maria Santos, the diner's owner, had fed generations of valley residents. She wiped down the counter as she spoke, each gesture precise, born from decades of practice. "She's spreading rumors about health code violations," she said. 30 years we've run this diner, never had a single complaint. Now suddenly, she's here, trying to force us to sell. It's not just your cabinets, everything we've built." I nodded, realizing she was right. This fight had grown. Beyond my own property, it was about the community, the valley, and the legacy that had been protected for decades. Even new residents began to come forward. David Kim, a man who had purchased a lot in Linda's development, confided that he had been overcharged by $50,000 through hidden consultation fees. "She called it a premium location adjustment," he said bitterly. "I call it theft." Each story added weight to the case I was quietly building, each neighbor a potential ally in the long, grueling battle that lay ahead. With Marcus, a Los Savi college friend, we began to plan countermeasures. Every complaint Linda filed became evidence. The septic system had been professionally inspected by Bob, a veteran with 30 years of experience. His report proved that my system was cleaner than most municipal plants. We discovered that while she targeted me, her own development upstream was contaminating Clearwater Creek, dumping gray water illegally. Irony became our unexpected weapon. Every attempt she made to overwhelm me with bureaucracy exposed her own violations. I started documenting each interaction meticulously, creating a timeline of harassment that would soon prove invaluable. We organized informal meetings at Maria's diner. Old Pete, David Kim, and several other longtime residents shared their experiences, each story reinforcing the pattern of Linda's aggressive tactics. Every conversation, every revelation, was a reminder that I wasn't isolated in this fight. It was no longer just my battle, it was ours. The valley itself seemed to lean toward justice, the wind through the pines carrying whispers of collective resolve. Even daily tasks became acts of defiance. Cutting firewood, chopping logs with my chainsaw, maintaining trails, and repairing the cabin became statements. Logs split echoed across the valley like a message. We are not giving in. Neighbors began to notice, offering quiet nods of support, sharing stories of their own encounters with Linda's intimidation. The sound of gravel under her Escalade's tires no longer signaled fear. It became a call to document, to prepare, to fight back legally and strategically. I reached out to Sarah Chen, private investigator known for her no-nonsense approach, to help trace Linda's previous behavior. Over coffee at the diner, she laid out her findings. "Your Linda has a pattern," she said, tapping a thick folder filled with evidence. "She's targeted property owners in multiple communities, always adjacent to potential developments. She's been sued for conflicts of interest. A real estate license has been suspended before for undisclosed dual representation. And she owes significant back taxes on Montana properties." Each revelation made my coffee taste sweeter. The bitter sting of victory mingling with the warmth of caffeine. This was not just harassment. It was systematic, repeatable, and now fully exposed. Asterisk, with community allies and legal experts at my side, I started preparing for escalation. Sheriff's deputies continued to respond to bogus complaints, but now I documented each visit, noting time, date, and outcome. Phone calls were recorded, letters scanned, and every action taken by Linda cataloged. I created a digital and physical timeline, a comprehensive record of her harassment. Each attempt to intimidate me added more weight. To my eventual legal strategy, asterisk, by late summer, the pattern was undeniable. Linda's escalation, the frequency of her complaints, her attempts to manipulate local and state authorities, and the impact on multiple residents revealed a clear strategy designed to exhaust, frighten, and force compliance. But instead of breaking us, it unified the community. People who had once been cautious or fearful were now sharing information, corroborating incidents, and lending credibility to the evidence I was compiling. The valley itself seemed alive with resistance. Every creaking pine, every ripple of the creek, every shadow along the trails reminded me that this land had endured far longer than any individual's ambition. Asterisk, at the same time. We began planning proactive counterattacks. Legal filings, septic inspections, environmental reports, and documentation of her financial irregularities became our toolkit. We weren't just defending, we were exposing. Every false claim she made became evidence of her unethical and possibly illegal behavior. Every attempt at intimidation strengthened our position. Linda Whitmore was methodical, aggressive, and reckless, but we were prepared. Her game was predictable, and her arrogance would be her downfall. Asterisk, by the end of the chapter, it was clear. The battle had shifted. It was no longer only about my cabin or my family's land. It was about protecting a community, a valley, and a legacy. Each neighbor, each piece of evidence, each recorded interaction contributed to a growing narrative of resistance. The valley, once a quiet refuge, had become a stage for justice. And as I stood on the porch one evening listening to the wind rustle through the pines and watching the sunset behind the mountains, I felt a surge of resolve. We were ready. Linda Whitmore had started the fight, but she had underestimated what she was up against. The community, the land, and history itself were on our side. And the counterattacks were only beginning. Asterisk. By the time Linda Whitmore escalated to the courts, I had already compiled a mountain of evidence. Every complaint, every visit, every letter and email was meticulously logged with timestamps, photographs, and sworn statements. I had prepared for this moment with the quiet patience my grandfather had taught me. He had built this valley, the cabin, and a legacy that couldn't be erased by someone's ambition or greed. The time had come to turn the tables and let the law reveal the truth. Asterisk, the first legal salvo came as an emergency injunction. It was filed against me, claiming threatening behavior at an HOA meeting I had never attended. I received the notice early one morning, the paper crisp and official, demanding my immediate response. I remained calm. The preparation had been thorough. I collected security footage from the cabin, date-stamped and time-stamped, showing clearly that I had not been anywhere near the alleged meeting. I organized the folder, knowing that every piece of evidence could dismantle her claims in seconds. Asterisk, court day arrived, and I represented myself. Linda appeared with her expensive lawyer, suit perfectly pressed, demeanor carefully rehearsed. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and anticipation. Judge Patricia Wells, a no-nonsense woman with eyes that missed nothing, presided over the case. She listened as Linda's lawyer presented the allegation of erratic behavior and threats. I calmly stood, projected the security footage onto the courtroom wall, the timestamps impossible to dispute. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady, "this did not happen. I was not present, and there is no evidence to support these claims." Judge Wells watched the footage, scrutinized the details, and within 5 minutes dismissed the case. "Miss Whitmore," she said sharply, "filing frivolous complaints is a waste of this court's time. Be careful in the future." Her gavel struck, and the tension in the room dissolved like mist under morning sunlight. Asterisk, but the legal system was only one front. I knew that professional investigation would strengthen my case and expose her pattern of harassment beyond any doubt. I hired Sarah Chen, a private investigator known for her thoroughness and no-nonsense approach. Over coffee at Maria's diner, she laid out her findings. The folder she brought was thick, each page filled with documentation of Linda's previous harassment in other communities, conflicts of interest, lawsuits, and undisclosed financial dealings. "She's done this before," Sarah said, tapping the folder with a pen. "Property owners adjacent to potential developments, multiple states, repeat offenses. The pattern is unmistakable." Every revelation was a blow to Linda's carefully constructed image, evidence that her actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a deliberate strategy to intimidate and coerce property owners. We also uncovered irregularities in her development business. Hidden fees, dual roles as HOA president and consultant, and failure to disclose financial conflicts were part of a complex web of unethical practices. These findings would later be instrumental in demonstrating her motivations and establishing a clear pattern of exploitation. I documented everything, cross-referencing county records, inspection reports, and testimonies from affected residents. Each file was meticulously organized, building a narrative that left no room for doubt. Meanwhile, the community rallied further. Old Pete provided first-hand accounts of Linda's attempts to pressure him into selling at below-market prices, threatening eminent domain if he refused. Maria shared stories of false health code allegations aimed at intimidating her business. David Kim's testimony about overcharges and hidden fees added a new layer of evidence, highlighting the financial exploitation embedded in her development practices. The Valley was speaking collectively, each voice amplifying the evidence we had gathered. It was no longer a battle between one man and a powerful developer. It was a fight to protect the rights, dignity, and livelihoods of everyone connected to this land. Court appearances became routine. Each time Linda filed a complaint, we presented documented evidence, security footage, inspection reports, sworn statements, and professional assessments. The legal team one had assembled, while informal, was methodical. We leveraged the inspector. Reports from Jake Morrison and Bob showing that my septic system exceeded state standards. The cabin met structural codes, and no environmental laws had been violated. Each professional evaluation dismantled her claims, making her attempts appear increasingly desperate and petty. Linda escalated further, contacting state environmental agencies claiming illegal timber operations and unpermitted construction. I presented county records, historical deeds, and grandfathered regulations showing my rights to manage the property, including deadfall collection and wood harvesting for personal use. The irony was rich. While she attempted to suppress me, her own development upstream violated environmental regulations, dumping gray water into the creek. By exposing these contradictions, I turned her attacks into evidence of her hypocrisy, a pattern that painted her as reckless and self-serving. The more Linda attempted to manipulate authorities, the more our case strengthened. Every official visit, every letter, every call she made was carefully documented. Deputies responding to false calls, state inspectors investigating baseless claims all became part of a comprehensive timeline showing persistent harassment. My strategy was clear. The longer she escalated, the more evidence we accumulated, and the stronger our eventual legal position became. By the end of this phase, Linda's attempts to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. Each professional investigation, court dismissal, and documented harassment added layers of credibility to my case. It wasn't just about winning a single injunction or disproving a claim. It was about exposing her long-term pattern, her motives, and her disregard for law and ethics. The Valley, the community, and the detailed professional work we had accumulated were now allies in this fight. I realized that legal battles required patience, precision, and strategy. Rushing would create mistakes, leaving openings for her manipulations. Each filing, inspection, and testimony was a step forward, a deliberate move in a larger game. The Valley itself, with its history, community, and natural resources, had become both the battleground and the evidence. Every tree, stream, and cabin told a story of resilience and rightful ownership. As I sat on my porch, watching the mountains glow with the last light of day, I felt the calm before the next storm. Linda's attacks were relentless, but she had underestimated the power of preparation, documentation, and community solidarity. Chapter. Foreclosed with the understanding that the fight was no longer about fear or intimidation. It was about justice, integrity, and defending a legacy. Linda Whitmore's next moves would be carefully watched, every action recorded, every claim challenged. The professional investigations had exposed patterns that were undeniable, and the legal battles were just beginning to tip in my favor. The valley, my family's inheritance, and the growing support of the community had become an unstoppable force. The real confrontation was only getting started, but for the first time, I felt the tide turning. By the time Linda realized that her repeated attacks had only strengthened my position, desperation had begun to show. She had filed injunctions, environmental complaints, noise and health violations, and yet every attempt had been meticulously documented, disproved, and turned into evidence against her. The initial arrogance, that smug confidence she carried like armor, had begun to crack. Her Escalade parked at the courthouse daily no longer signaled dominance, it became a symbol of panic. A visible reminder that her strategy was failing. I had spent months gathering proof, coordinating with legal and professional experts, and rallying the community. Sarah Chen, my private investigator, had produced an overwhelming dossier of her past harassment patterns, financial irregularities, and legal missteps. Every piece of documentation painted a consistent story. Linda Whitmore targeted landowners adjacent to profitable developments, often misrepresenting facts to authorities, and repeatedly violated disclosure rules. This wasn't isolated, it was systemic. The weight of evidence was on my side, and now it was time to bring it into the courtroom strategically. The first hearing of the week was for a complaint she had filed about threatening behavior during an HOA meeting. I had already confirmed my absence through security footage and witness statements. Judge Patricia Wells listened patiently as Linda's lawyer presented exaggerated claims, each one more desperate than the last. I presented my evidence calmly, step by step. Security footage, timestamps, sworn statements from neighbors, and recordings of phone calls. Every claim she made was disproven, her arguments collapsing under the sheer weight of facts. Dismissed the complaint in under 10 minutes, her expression unreadable but resolute. Frivolous filings waste the court's time, she said. I suggest caution moving forward. Linda's eyes flickered with frustration, her usual composure slipping. But this was only the beginning. She continued escalating in more subtle ways, attempting to create pressure through environmental agencies and county inspections. She even tried to bring in the fire marshal again, claiming my wood stove was a public hazard. I had prepared for this scenario weeks in advance. Fire Marshal Betty Chen, who had inspected the stove previously, returned with her team, examining every component. Clearances, airflow, materials, all exceeded code. Her team's reports confirmed textbook quality installation, leaving no room for manipulation. Linda's attempt to leverage authority once more had failed spectacularly. Adding yet another layer of documentation to her pattern of harassment. Meanwhile, my legal strategy focused on both exposing her misconduct and protecting the land. Every official complaint she filed, every false accusation, and every interaction with government agencies was meticulously logged. Deputies responding to noise complaints, state inspectors reviewing baseless environmental claims, and county officials examining outdated permits all became evidence of a consistent pattern of harassment. Each attempt to intimidate me became a building block for a comprehensive legal narrative. I felt a growing confidence. The longer she pushed, the more evidence we collected. Community support strengthened my position further. Old Pete provided sworn statements about attempts to coerce him into selling property at below-market prices. Maria, the diner owner, shared detailed accounts of false health code rumors aimed at intimidating her. David Kim contributed testimony regarding hidden fees and overcharges. Each piece of community evidence validated the claim that Linda's behavior was systemic and not directed solely at me. These combined accounts created a powerful narrative, a developer exploiting authority, targeting individuals to expand her profits at the expense of families, landowners, and community integrity. Asterisk, the final court maneuvers were carefully planned with Marcus and our team of advisors. We knew that patience was essential, filing counterclaims, submitting extensive documentation, and presenting professional inspections required precision. Rushing could create gaps for her to exploit. Every move was calculated, anticipating her next escalation. We prepared for injunctions, frivolous lawsuits, and attempts to manipulate agency reports. Our strategy was defensive, but proactive, ensuring that every action she took could be legally countered and documented. Asterisk as weeks passed. Her desperation became more visible, for once she arrived with confidence, now she was visibly anxious. Her visits to the courthouse were frequent, her complaints more aggressive, her claims increasingly implausible. The Escalade's presence, once a symbol of power, had become a recurring omen of her anxiety. Every time another official or resident documented an interaction, it reinforced our position and weakened hers. I observed her patterns, anticipating moves before they happened, preparing responses that left no room for manipulation. Asterisk, by mid-month, the cumulative weight of evidence, professional investigations, and community testimony had created an undeniable narrative. The legal filings painted a picture of repeated harassment, conflicts of interest, and unethical business practices. Every false claim, every attempt to intimidate, every escalation was carefully logged, ready to be presented as proof of a systemic pattern. Linda's position was faltering. Her legal team began to hesitate, and whispers in the courthouse suggested that her approach was reckless and unsustainable. Asterisk, throughout this phase, my daily routine remained grounded in the valley itself. Chopping firewood, tending the cabin, and maintaining trails were no longer just chores. They were acts of resilience and demonstration of rightful ownership. The valley's natural rhythms, from the rustling of pine needles to the call of distant hawks, provided both a backdrop and a reminder of what was at stake. Each swing of the axe, each repaired log, each maintained trail was symbolic a statement that this land, built and preserved by generations, would not yield to corporate greed. Asterisk, as Chapter 5 closed, the stakes were clear. Linda. Whitmore's desperation had made her predictable. Her pattern of harassment was exposed, her credibility eroding in the cumulative evidence. Supported by professional inspections and community testimony, was now overwhelming. The court system, the authorities, and the community were aligned, in a way that made further escalation risky for her. The battle was far from over, but the tide had clearly turned. The valley, my family's inheritance, and the growing support network had created a fortress that could withstand her aggressive tactics. Every documented attempt, every disproven claim, every community ally brought us closer to final victory. And the fight for Clearwater Valley had entered its decisive phase. Asterisk. By the time the final hearings began, the momentum had shifted decisively. Months of documentation, professional inspections, community testimonies, and careful legal strategy had created an unassailable position. Linda Whitmore, who had started with arrogance and confidence, now appeared anxious and defensive. Every court filing, every official visit, every community statement formed a cumulative narrative that painted her not as a protector of the community, but as a relentless aggressor. Attempting to bully her way into profit and control, asterisk, the courtroom was tense the morning of the decisive hearing. Judge Wells presided again, her gaze firm and focused. Linda arrived with her lawyer, both carrying the weight of failed claims and mounting evidence against them. The air was heavy with anticipation, and outside a few neighbors from the valley gathered quietly, waiting for the outcome that could define the future of the land and their community. Security cameras and timestamps from previous incidents were projected, showing a clear timeline of harassment and false claims. Every attempt she had made to intimidate me, disprove regulations, and manipulate authorities was meticulously documented. Asterisk, I began with a calm presentation, explaining the history of the property, its grandfathered status, and the timeline of Linda's harassment. Each incident was supported by professional reports from Fire Marshal Betty Chen, Septic Inspector Bob, and County Inspector Jake Morrison. Sworn statements from Old Pete, Maria Santos, and David Kim corroborated the evidence of a systematic pattern of intimidation. The judge listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Linda's legal team, whose expressions became increasingly tense as each point dismantled their arguments. Asterisk. The turning point came when Sarah Chen's investigative dossier was presented. Her thorough documentation of Linda's harassment patterns across multiple communities, financial irregularities, and past legal violations left little room for dispute. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "this is not an isolated incident. There is a clear, consistent pattern of predatory behavior designed to intimidate property owners for personal gain." Every detail in her report aligned with the evidence we had gathered locally, forming a cohesive story that the court could not ignore. Asterisk. Linda's lawyer attempted to argue that my documentation was selective and biased. But the comprehensive nature of our evidence left no room for refutation. Security footage, timestamps, professional inspections, sworn statements, and historical deeds combined to form an airtight case. Even minor complaints she had filed, such as noise or health code violations, were disproven by official reports, leaving the court with a clear picture of systematic harassment. Judge Wells reviewed the evidence carefully, her expression unchanging but decisive. After deliberation, she dismissed all pending claims, warning Linda against any future frivolous filings. The gavel struck, echoing across the room like a declaration of finality. Asterisk. Outside the courtroom, a wave of relief washed over the community. Old Pete shook my hand firmly, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "Finally," he said, "justice. Took too long, but it's ours." Maria Santos brought out coffee for everyone, celebrating quietly yet meaningfully. David Kim nodded, gratitude evident in his expression, his faith in fairness restored after months of manipulation and overcharges. The valley, which had once seemed under siege, felt alive again with the collective relief and triumph of its residents. Asterisk. But the victory was not just about court rulings. It was about protecting the legacy my grandfather had built. The cabin, the trails, the forests, and the mountain streams had survived threats, bureaucracy, and intimidation. Every act of resilience, every log chopped, every inspection passed. Every neighbor rallied had reinforced the principle that hard work, respect for the land, and community solidarity could withstand greed and manipulation. The land remained intact, its history honored, and its future secured. Asterisk. Linda's defeat was complete and public. Word spread quickly through the valley and neighboring communities about the pattern of harassment and the legal outcomes. Her professional reputation suffered significantly, and the consequences of her undisclosed financial conflicts became widely known. The escalade that had once symbolized power now represented the hubris of a person who underestimated the determination of a community and the resilience of a family legacy. Asterisk. In the weeks following the court victories, the valley returned to a sense of normalcy. Daily routines resumed with quiet satisfaction. I continued to maintain the cabin, chop firewood, and walk the trails. Each swing of the axe, each repaired board, and each cleared path became symbolic reminders that the land belonged to those who had nurtured it and respected its history. The community, once wary, now stood together, vigilant but confident in their collective ability to protect what was theirs. Asterisk. Looking back, it was clear that preparation, patience, and documentation had been key. Every photograph, timestamp, inspection, report, and sworn statement had built a story that the court could not ignore. Every neighbor's testimony reinforced the narrative, proving that this was not just a personal battle, but a defense of values, community, and integrity. Linda Whitmore's escalating desperation had become her downfall. Her pattern of harassment, once hidden, was fully exposed. Asterisk. Even as the valley settled into peace, the lessons remained clear. Vigilance, community solidarity, and careful documentation can counter relentless intimidation. The law, when supported by evidence and persistence, is a powerful tool to protect property, legacy, and community values. My grandfather's vision, preserved through years of work and dedication, remained intact. The cabin stood strong, a testament to resilience, and the community had proven that collective support could turn intimidation into a catalyst for unity and justice. Asterisk by the end of the story. The valley was not just a plot of land or a series of cabins. It was a living testament to the principle that integrity, preparation, and solidarity could overcome greed, harassment, and threats. The fight had been long and arduous, but the outcome reinforced the importance of standing firm, documenting every step, and never underestimating the power of community and legacy. Clearwater Valley remained protected, its history honored, and its future secured. And for the first time in months, the sound of wind through the pines, the distant calls of hawks, and the quiet rustle of the cabin walls felt peaceful again, proof that determination, justice, and perseverance could prevail. The fight for Clearwater Valley wasn't just about one cabin or one piece of land. It was about standing up against intimidation, protecting a legacy, and proving that persistence, preparation, and community can overcome greed. Every log chopped, every inspection passed, and every neighbor who spoke up contributed to this victory. My grandfather's vision survived. The community grew stronger, and justice was served. Asterisk, if you enjoyed this story and want to see more real-life battles and inspiring victories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support helps keep stories like this alive, and we have many more coming your way. Asterisk.